The ringing of the final bell faded, leaving a silence that seemed too profound for just the end of another lecture at the Watchtower. I capped my pen, the last words of my essay on the ethical quandaries of using LSD for interrogation purposes drying on the page. Glancing around, I noticed the uneasy shifts and muted whispers of my classmates, a usual scene in this far-flung school nestled deep in the Alaskan wilderness. Our teacher, Mr. Harrow, cleared his throat, a signal that he was about to leave. "I'll be back in a moment," he announced, his eyes briefly meeting mine with a spark that suggested secrets I wasn't privy to. His steps were hurried as he entered the adjoining restroom, and the door clicked shut behind him. Little did we know, that simple act of excusing himself was about to spiral into an ordeal none of us could have anticipated. Minutes turned into an hour, and Mr. Harrow did not return. Concern morphed into speculative gossip. Maybe he teleported somewhere, Miles joked, trying to lighten the mood with a reference to our unique abilities. Yet his laughter didn't quite reach his eyes, which flickered with the same unease that clawed at my gut. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the room, our classroom door slammed shut without warning. A vortex of purple light erupted in the center of the room, a silent scream ripping through the fabric of reality. From this swirling chaos emerged creatures so grotesque they could only dwell in nightmares, flying scorpions with faces too human, and hellhounds whose growls resonated with the sounds of the damned. Panic ensued as the creatures attacked. Chairs overturned, papers flew, and screams pierced the air. My heart pounded in my chest, an erratic drum of terror and adrenaline. In that chaos, I found my feet moving on their own, driven by the primal need to survive. Miles grabbed my arm, pulling me behind him. "We need to get out of here," he shouted over the cacophony of our classmates' terror. Alina was already by the door, her brow furrowed in concentration as she mentally shoved desks and chairs to barricade it, buying us some time. With no plan but to survive, we pushed through the back door of the classroom, stumbling into the dimly lit hallway. The walls, usually so stern and unyielding, echoed with the sounds of our flight. Alina, Miles, and I exchanged looks, an unspoken agreement binding us. We'd stand together, whatever this nightmare brought. Our escape was a blur of motion and fear. As we navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the Watchtower, every shadow seemed to twitch with malevolent intent. The school, designed as a haven for those like us with paranormal abilities, now felt like a trap, every hallway and classroom a potential ambush. As we rounded a corner, the eerie silence was shattered by another scream. This one cut short in a way that spoke of finality. My stomach churned, the fear a palpable thing that threatened to overwhelm my senses. But then it hit me, a surge of power rippling through my body, an instinctual response from the deepest part of my being. It was my ability, the one I had fought so hard to control. As the reality of our situation sank in, I knew that the time to fight was now. My skin began to tingle, the beginnings of a transformation that I had both feared and needed. This was no longer just about escape. It was about survival, and I was ready to embrace the beast within. We pushed through the corridors, our footsteps echoing against the cold, unyielding floors of the Watchtower. Behind us, the screams and chaos of the attack receded, but the danger was far from over. Every shadow flickered with potential threats, every closed door a barrier between us and whatever horrors lay beyond. As we paused to catch our breath, I could feel the strange, crawling sensation of my skin shifting, my senses heightening. It was the onset of my transformation, a reptilian alter ego I had long feared and suppressed. Miles noticed the change, his eyes widening slightly. "Hey, it's okay," he murmured, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We need whatever edge we can get." With no clear plan, we decided to head towards Mr. Harrow's office, hoping to find some clues about what was happening. The door was ajar, as if inviting us into the lion's den. Inside, the room was shrouded in darkness, save for the moonlight spilling through the window, casting long, sinister shadows across the floor. Alina stepped forward, her hands flickering with telekinetic energy as she rifled through the papers and drawers with just a thought. Her face was a mask of concentration, the debris of our desperate search floating in the air around her. "Look at this," she finally said, holding up a series of cryptic notes that hinted at deeper, darker experiments that involved all of us. The discovery of Mr. Harrow's involvement with the demonic child was a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. The notes detailed plans for harnessing our powers, not for our benefit, but for something much more sinister. The weight of this revelation hung heavy between us, a tangible shift in our understanding of our predicament. Our discussion was cut short by a sudden, piercing howl that resonated through the walls, more animal than human. It was a call to arms, a reminder that our time was running out. "We can't stay here," Miles said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to keep moving." As we ventured deeper into the school, our path was a patchwork of evasion and confrontation. We encountered more creatures, each encounter more harrowing than the last. My transformation, once a source of personal horror, became our lifeline. My scales deflected claws that would have torn flesh, and my enhanced senses allowed us to navigate through less traveled paths. In one breathless moment, we found ourselves cornered by a pack of hellhounds. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent fire, their snarls a soundtrack to our impending doom. But it was then that Miles' intuition shone through. He grabbed us and pulled us into a hidden alcove just as the beasts charged. We watched, barely daring to breathe, as they thundered past. With every narrow escape, our resolve hardened. The school's remote location, once our sanctuary, now felt like a cage. There was no cavalry coming to rescue us, no easy escape route. It was up to us, with our unique abilities, to find our way out. We were no longer just students. We were survivors, warriors in a battle we hadn't signed up for. As we made our way to the safety of the telekinetics laboratory, a plan began to form. Using the school's specialized equipment, we could perhaps create a diversion, an explosion of energy and power to clear a path to freedom. Alina was confident, her abilities perfectly suited to manipulate the volatile substances we found. "This might just work," she said, a fierce determination in her eyes. Our newfound courage was a fragile thing, tempered by the horrors we had witnessed. But as we prepared our last stand in that dimly lit lab, surrounded by the tools of our potential salvation, I felt a shift in the dynamic. We were no longer at the mercy of our fears. We were taking control, fighting back with every ounce of our combined powers. And in that moment, I realized that whatever lay ahead, we faced it together. The corridors of the Watchtower had never seemed so ominous, their shadows more pronounced under the flicker of the emergency lights. As we made our way to the central telekinetics laboratory, my transformation became more pronounced, scales forming a rough protective layer across my skin. Each step was heavy, burdened not just by fear, but by the impending reality of what I was becoming. Inside the lab, the air was charged with static, the tension palpable. Alina and Miles set to work immediately, gathering materials for what would be our desperate attempt at creating a distraction. Amidst beakers and buzzing electrical equipment, I could feel the beast within me stirring, eager for release, drawn by the energy around us. "We need to hurry," Alina said, her voice a whisper over the hum of machinery. She was manipulating the chains and knives with her mind, setting up a perimeter defense around us. Her control was precise, every movement calculated to maximize our chances of survival. As we prepared, the door burst open with a force that sent a shockwave through the room. Standing there, amidst the swirling mist of disrupted air, was Mr. Harrow. But the man who taught us history was gone, replaced by something darker, his eyes glowing with a fire that matched the pyrokinesis he wielded. Beside him, the figure of the demonic child emerged, its presence chilling the air further. The confrontation was inevitable. "You don't understand what you're meddling with," Mr. Harrow's voice boomed, tinged with a madness that made my blood run cold. He raised his hands, flames licking between his fingers, a clear threat. But the fear that had once gripped me was receding, replaced by a fierce determination. The beast within wasn't just a curse. It was a part of me, a powerful ally in this fight. With a roar that echoed through the lab, I embraced my transformation fully, scales hardening, reflexes sharpening. I was ready. Miles acted as if on cue, his intuition guiding him. He dodged a burst of flame and tackled the demonic child, disrupting its concentration and giving us the opening we needed. Alina's telekinetic abilities flared, sending knives spinning through the air, targeting Mr. Harrow in a dance of deadly precision. The battle was chaotic, a symphony of powers clashing with each pulse of energy. I found myself at the center, the eye of the storm, clashing with Mr. Harrow in a physical and elemental showdown. Our powers collided, his fire against my newfound strength and resilience. As the fight intensified, a moment of clarity broke through the chaos. Mr. Harrow faltered, the realization of his impending defeat dawning in his eyes. With a final, desperate effort, I lunged, my reptilian form fully in control, and struck. The blow was decisive, leaving him stunned and defeated on the floor. The aftermath was a silence as deep as the night outside. The demonic child, realizing its protector was defeated, vanished into the shadows from whence it came, its schemes thwarted for now. We stood amidst the wreckage of the lab, panting, our survival bought with bravery and desperation. "I think it's over," I managed to say, my voice rough with the remnants of the battle. Alina nodded, her eyes scanning the room for any further threats. Miles slumped against a wall, relief etched across his face. But as the adrenaline faded, so did my transformation, leaving me human once more, albeit shaken. The realization of what I had done, of the power I wielded, was overwhelming. Yet there was no time to dwell. We needed to leave, to escape the confines of this cursed place. With Mr. Harrow's defeat, the immediate threat was neutralized, but the journey was far from over. We gathered our strength, our resolve hardened by the night's events. The Watchtower was no longer a school. It was a battlefield, and we were its veterans, scared but unbroken. As we stepped out into the cold Alaskan night, the wilderness awaited us, a new chapter in our extraordinary lives just beginning. The cold Alaskan air bit into my scales as I stepped out of the Watchtower, the weight of our actions heavy on my shoulders. The battle was over, but the war within me raged on. The transformation had receded, leaving me in my human form again, but the echoes of the beast's power lingered in my muscles and mind. As we trekked away from the school, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of snow under our feet. Alina walked slightly ahead, her posture tense, every sense alert for any signs of pursuit or danger. Miles kept glancing back, his intuition no doubt on high alert after the night's revelations and confrontations. "We did what we had to do," I finally said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded hollow, the reality of having defeated Mr. Harrow and the demonic child settling in. There was no victory in this escape, only survival, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Alina stopped and turned to look at me, her eyes searching my face. "We did," she agreed, her voice firm yet fatigued. "But now we need to think about what's next. We can't go back, not after everything." The wilderness around us was vast, a sea of white stretching into the horizon under the pale light of the dawn. The isolation of the Watchtower had once been a shield, but now it felt like a barrier, keeping us from the world beyond, from help. As we continued our march, my thoughts turned to the future. Where could a group of teenagers with extraordinary abilities go? Who would believe our story? The weight of the unknown pressed down on me, a burden I was not sure I was ready to carry. Miles suddenly stopped, his expression serious. "We might be alone now, but we're not helpless. We've got each other, and we got our abilities," he said, looking between Alina and me. His words were a lifeline, a reminder of the strength we had found in each other. The day gave way to evening as we found a sheltered spot to rest. The adrenaline of the night had long since faded, replaced by exhaustion and the cold reality of our situation. I couldn't help but reflect on the transformation that had saved us, but also frightened me. It was a part of me I could no longer deny or fear. It was my survival. That night, under the stars, we made a pact. No matter what lay ahead, we would face it together. Our journey from students to survivors to fugitives had bound us in ways that the walls of any school never could. As dawn broke over the mountains, I looked at my companions, their faces set with determination and hope. With the first light, we would start anew, forging a path through the wilderness, away from the shadows of the Watchtower. The world beyond the mountains was vast, filled with dangers and wonders alike. But as I felt the residual strength from my transformation pulse through my veins, I knew we were ready. Ready to face whatever challenges came, ready to protect each other, ready to find our place in a world that might not understand us, but would eventually have to accept us. Our journey from the Watchtower was not just an escape, it was a beginning. And as the sun rose, casting golden light across the snow, I knew that whatever awaited us, we would meet it head-on, not as monsters, but as warriors, friends, and survivors of the darkest nights.